We're going to try to make sense of everything in college football. Dean Legge, Matt DeBerry, another edition of Riding Home. Matt, there's been a lot that's happened this week. I do want to start with at this point, likely or probable new discussion of Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC. This happened the day after I left Media Days on Wednesday. We're recording this. I'm just going to say we're recording this on Thursday midday so that I'm certain our stuff will be outdated. But your initial reaction to what's happening with OU in Texas?
Well, it's going to drastically change college football. I mean, they tried to do this a few years ago, if I remember correctly. Um, but yeah, you're going to have I say most, but a lot of the biggest football programs in college football all together in the SEC, and it very well could happen. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how, do you put 8 teams in the West, 8 teams in the East? Is it 4 regions of four? It'll be interesting to see it all play out. But even with the 12 team, playoff that's coming, a lot of these teams are going to get in, but you're going to see a lot of programs beat up on each other. I mean, it's happening right now already. You bring in two major programs. It's clear they want to be in the SEC. It is the place to be. It's the gold standard. And at the end of the day, it's exciting, especially covering these teams and conferences to be able to cover Georgia, Oklahoma, or Georgia, Texas on a normal basis is pretty cool. But it just means more great games, and I mean, it just means more in the SEC. We
Well,
see
what
it
does it
more and
mean
more.
for you as a fan? You know, we don't run a fan site, but we are fans of the league. I mean, we pretty much watch as much college football as we can. What do you think it means for fans? It's probably a better product.
I'd say so, especially if you're a fan of Oklahoma or Texas. I think
Oh
they're
yeah,
pretty happy about this.
yeah.
It just means more big games against big programs. Again, Georgia hadn't played Oklahoma since before they played in the Rose Bowl. We're going to have more of those matchups. They have an iconic game against Texas. I guess that was in the 70s or 80s. That's still a
84.
big deal.
Yeah.
People talk about that, right? So I think overall it's exciting, but what do you do if you're Clemson, Ohio State, USC? You're one of the major programs on the outside looking in. They can't be all too happy with this, I'd say.
This is going to be a long discussion. Let's not. I don't want to. The initial conversation about Texas and Oklahoma, people immediately, and you did this too. You we're trying to figure out how you could do pods. I had a discussion. This is really, I want to just sell the site real quick. This is one reason you should go to Dog Post, be a subscriber. Matt, right now, people can sign up and get an entire month for $1. And people who watch these videos are really going to the site. I do want y'all to take advantage of it because there's information that changes all the time. In previewing what's going to happen in my What We Were Hearing column on Sunday, uh, people around the league are not so certain that there will be divisions, Matt. You sent me pods, and in talking with, I try not to give away who I talk with. In talking with high level people that have been around the block for a while, they immediately say that it would be that pods are they're not going to be able to pull that off and play semifinals for the SEC championship. Like something like that would not be permitted, and that they would have to have some help from the NCAA in order to go away from divisions. I think there is a notion now coming up in the near future that there may be pods as you describe it, but then they would be formed into divisions or something to where Georgia Auburn, Georgia Gators, those games don't go away. Alabama Tennessee doesn't go away, but you inherit Texas LSU. You inherit there's some things to be done, but structurally speaking, it looks like the league would have to figure out either how to not have divisions or get a waiver from the NCAA about this. And that person, I know you want to talk. That particular person said at the end of our conversation, and that's if the NCAA exists at the time.
Yeah. I do think that it makes the conference tougher to win, obviously, but at the end of the day, the best teams are going to rise to the top like they do every year.
Mm-hmm.
But Texas isn't going to be this Texas forever. I
No.
assume they were going to bounce back. Sarkeesian's a great coach, and I think that they are going to take a step forward. Oklahoma is a top 5, 6 program in college football each and every year. They're always going to be tough. So, things definitely got harder for Georgia's path for a national championship. But at the end of the
I
day,
don't think
you got
this
to get to
changes
that
that.
12
Go ahead.
playoff anyway. And I don't know how often they're going to be playing Oklahoma and Texas. I
Right.
assume it's not going to be every year. But again, the
Certainly
way
not.
they schedule it out and the way that they, configure the conference, it's going to go a long way. But it is exciting. But at the end of the day, you got to get to that 12-team playoff. And it looks like a number of SEC teams are going to be there every year anyway.
So let me pause and go backwards a little bit. If you want to know who's driving the boat in college football, the person is Greg Sankey, and it's that simple. He's the commissioner of the SEC. He made clear at media days this week on Monday that he did not use this phrase, but that they are not happy with what's going on in the NCAA. The 400-page manual he feels like is not relevant. The conferences have always been more powerful than the NCAA because the NCAA is a collection of 1,500 schools. So he's driving the boat, and he's holding hands and is married to Disney, which is ESPN and ABC. So if you want to know what's forcing change right now, it's Greg Sankey and his 14-team league and Disney. So that duo is trying to figure out what is the best move for them, Matt. If you all, this is an intelligent group that watches this stuff and a pretty worldly group. I don't know that you're a giant fan of this, Matt, but English Premier Soccer and UEFA, that's where college football is going. It doesn't necessarily matter how your regular season is. Everybody gears up for Champions League, and you just try to win Champions League. Yeah. So this is going to be, hey, if you have a 2-loss regular season in the SEC, can you play well enough to play when the 12-team playoff gets there? One last part of the ramble, Matt, and then you can take it. Why would Greg Sankey, and specifically why would Disney want this? I hear a lot of people say it doesn't give you new media markets. And I would say, in another vernacular, that's pre-9/11 thinking. And I get that from a lot of industry people too, people in the league. This move would give the SEC 7 of the top 14 TV brands in college football. And those teams in order, Matt, would be Alabama at number 1. They have played in the last 5 years in regular season games in front of 318 million people. It would give them Georgia, who's played in front of 204 million people. LSU at 198. Auburn at 182. The Gators at 197. I skipped Oklahoma. I'm sorry. It would give them Oklahoma at 193. Auburn at 182. The Gators at 179 million. Texas at 147 million. And then the Aggies at 130 million. So you want to know why they're doing this? It's because you're laughing. It's about viewers, not necessarily where they are.
Yeah. And especially when the two programs are itching to get into the conference too. This is what they want. It's kind of tough to say no, but my thinking is Texas A&M cannot be happy with this. And
no, they're not.
Has Clemson and Florida State ever tried to get into the SEC?
I don't know the answer to that, but I'll tell you right now that would probably not go down. Georgia would vote no against Florida State. Georgia would vote no. The Gators would vote no. Alabama would probably vote no. Auburn would definitely vote no. I would say that's your 4 votes. That's it. Clemson, Carolina would vote no. Georgia would vote no. Tennessee would vote no. I don't know that. Clemson doesn't. Clemson is a great football brand these last 6 years. But,
would they want to? I don't even know if they would want to.
Oh, they would thump their chest and say, yeah, it would make my life easier. I'd say that. You're saying Clemson and Florida State. The truth of the matter is, Florida State right now just doesn't matter. Right. And they're having a lot of problems financially. No one's watching them play television. And, Clemson's at number 8 overall in regular season games. They're behind Oklahoma, but in front of Florida. I was actually surprised by that a little bit. And those are because of Notre Dame games. So,
Yeah.
those in a conference championship against Notre Dame, the 2016 against Notre Dame, and the game this past season against Notre Dame, those really helped Clemson's numbers. But they are a top 10 brand on television right now, but Wisconsin is almost two. So, is Wisconsin more powerful than Clemson, Matt?
No.
I don't think
No.
so, but they're within 20 million viewers, and they
Right.
did that without Notre Dame. So, um, a lot of television is not just the brand, but it's who your rival is. Obviously, Auburn benefits from Alabama being their rival. Ohio State and Michigan are both top 4, and that's because of that particular game, and that's what Disney would be buying, Matt. You're
Yeah.
talking about all in the same league here, man. You would have Texas OU. Now think about this schedule.
Yeah.
Think about this schedule. You could kick the season off with, well, one person told me that games against Clemson are gone if this happens for Georgia. Stuff like that. It's just not going to happen.
Well, they were supposed to play Oklahoma and Texas, what, 26, 27, 28, that type
But
of stuff.
but games like that, Georgia, Oregon, Georgia, Clemson, Georgia, Michigan,
Ohio State.
they're just not. They're less likely to happen. But think about the 12-week schedule, and that you can open the season with. You could open the season with LSU, Texas, and
Which is
go.
what happened a couple years ago, which is great. I mean,
And that
everyone
was a
wants.
huge game. And you would just go down the line, and like when Georgia Tennessee, which is a 5 million viewer game pretty much all the time, is like your number 18 game in the league. Think about Alabama, Texas. Think about Georgia, Texas, LSU, Texas. I mean, you're not going to get Alabama, Texas, and you're not going to get Georgia, Texas in the same season, but you would start getting, Matt, and I want to know your reaction to this. Georgia and Alabama would start playing more often. I mean,
Absolutely.
in the last since the divisions have since Mizzou and A&M have come in the league, they've played a combined 2 games in the regular season.
So, how long is CBS and the SEC together? Because you're going to have some of the best CBS doubleheaders going on for most of the season with all this. I know Texas OU, they always play at noon. I don't know if that would have an impact moving over to the SEC or how long that contract is, but I mean, they're going to be playing great games every week, multiple games. So,
You've asked a great relevant question, and one that people around the league have really kind of, I don't know about they've laughed about, but one note to me was that's going to be a long cold wait. Right now, the Big 12's contract runs out in 2025. Texas and Oklahoma could leave if they wanted to, but they would be forfeiting money. Number 2, SEC on CBS contract ends after the 2023 season. Disney isn't doing this to help CBS out any, and they're not. CBS is not going to renegotiate what is a conference-wide $55 million yearly contract. So this would happen in 2024. The other part that is so critical here, though, Matt, is the pushback from people around the league, etc., administrators, for lack of a better term, is this is not going to happen unless there's more money. They are not just bringing Texas and Oklahoma in to go from, splitting $300 million 14 ways to splitting it 16. That's not going to happen. People are not going to vote yes to that. So there's got to be a renegotiation of that deal. It begins in 2024, and that's a 10-year deal, which means all of everything in the SEC would come up around 2035 with Disney. So Disney may say, okay, we'll do this, but you got to extend it for 3 or 5 more years, getting it to 2040. And, some of us might not be around by then, but this is a big moment for the league. And honestly, this is a big moment for Disney and their shareholders like myself who have to decide, is this the right move in a TV landscape where no matter which network you're talking about, Fox News or ESPN, viewership is down from what it was 15 years ago. And is it right, Matt, to put more money into something that you can't grow
Yeah, the numbers
with
are
traditional viewers? With
right.
traditional viewers,
But college football viewers have gone down the past year,
they
correct?
did, but everything's down. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Um,
talking about a national championship game that didn't even have 20 million viewers. For perspective, Georgia, Alabama was 28 million viewers. So
and that's Alabama, Ohio State too,
yeah,
right? Two of the major,
the
yeah.
two biggest brands in college football. Alabama at 318 million regular season viewers over the last 5 years. Ohio State at 297. So
So
I that would be a 30 million view
yeah,
game, and it wasn't.
if they come on board, is this like a next year type of deal, or is that what you're
No,
hearing? Or
I do not think so. And that's not what I'm hearing. I'm not. There's still a lot of confusion about when. There's still a lot of confusion about a lot of this. I think that it's pretty clear that this would happen in 2024, perhaps 2025. But I think that there's another thing in place here, Matt, which is the Longhorn Network. That's a full-blown non-starter for the SEC. That will not happen if they come into the league. I mean, one person told me that that Nick Saban would shit himself if that were the case, and someone else said that Kirby would go wild. So that's not going to happen. And the coaches don't really have any say in this. They don't. This is about presidents. But the reason I mention the Longhorn Network, though, is that's a $15 million deal right now, a year deal for Disney. They're losing money on that deal. They could bring Texas over, cut their losses with Longhorn Network, and instead of the traditional, let's just say every team in the league, for round numbers, is making 30 million a year from Disney. These are round numbers. Those are not correct numbers. Then them cutting out 15 million and just doing it a different way would benefit Disney. It would be a win for Disney. They would be cutting losses and adding value somewhere else. You don't get to do that very often. I do want
yeah,
to ask you, what do you think this means for Ohio State, for the ACC, which I guess at this stage is just Clemson, and for the Pac-12?
it's tough to get over that hump that you're not in the SEC at that point.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Everyone jokes about Clemson's schedule. Everyone's starting to joke more and more about Ohio State's schedule, especially with Michigan being so down. USC's a program doing their best to get back to where they once were. This isn't going to help them at all either. They're on the outside looking in, and they're going to have great teams, especially Ohio State. And I don't know how much, how long Clemson can keep this run that they have going on. But again, with that schedule, it's going to be hard for people to take them as seriously
Right.
as they do now.
In the recruiting world, what do you make of this sort of news? I mean, how would OU and Texas coming into the league affect recruiting across the board?
It'll affect Texas too, who's losing kids to LSU from the state. They're losing guys to Ohio State, but for different reasons. But I mean, they've got the number one player in the country, superstar, who's leaving the state of Texas to go play at Ohio State. If they're in the SEC, maybe that kid stays around. A lot of these kids want to play in the SEC, and now they will give them that opportunity.
What I mean, what was your initial reaction when you heard this sort of coming out? I mean, did you, what do you actually, better yet, what do you think, how does this affect Georgia? Just period, whether it's recruiting or, I mean, revenue, it would go higher still. I don't know if people say it's all about money, but at the end of the day, the money is great, but you still have to live in this league, which would be a much better basketball league at that point, which no one cares about. But what's your initial thought? I mean, if you're Georgia and Texas and Oklahoma come in, do you think that the old SEC died when Carolina came in, or what do you make of that?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, the brand is already the strongest of any conference in college football. This only helps that. I mean, Oklahoma does well in a lot of sports. They just won the
Yeah.
softball championship. Texas has baseball and sometimes other sports that aren't as big as football and basketball and so on. But
Swimming.
um, it's you're bringing into programs that bring in a lot of money, schools that care about athletics. But for Georgia, yeah, it's a little tougher because now you have to possibly go through Oklahoma or Texas if you do get over the Alabama hump or and get past LSU, and it makes things tougher, but it also helps in the long run, I think too. But this definitely doesn't help Georgia basketball or baseball much or anything like that. But
What do you think Ole Miss, Arkansas, and Missouri are thinking right now? I mean, those are programs that have never been at the top of really much of any league, and now they are firmly in the middle to bottom half of the league. You're bringing in two of the more powerful athletic departments in the country. What do you make of the mid-level schools? Because at the same time, Matt, this is not going to happen without 11 SEC schools currently in the league voting yes to it. So, I mean, I got people saying, I don't think this is certainly going to happen, but over time now it seems like it will. What do you think of those sort of middle level schools?
it just made it a lot tougher. A good friend of mine is a big South Carolina fan, and he feels like they have it tough already. And now,
They do.
you're bringing in two more. But if you're Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Arkansas, you just got to shake your head and think, what do we have to do? I mean, what do we have to do to compete in this league that we're already struggling with? And now you're bringing in, Oklahoma and Texas. It definitely makes things tougher. And Tennessee it's tough for them to come back and be the old Tennessee when the league just got harder once again.
But I do think too, man, when you start talking about the league and football, if this is going to be a 12-team playoff, which it clearly is, sorry, Dabo, it doesn't. I mean, it just adds more people to a conference. It doesn't make the path more difficult. You're going to have to beat them anyway.
Yeah, but you definitely can't lose 3 or 4 games and have a shot in it. So
I
you're
think
still
you
going to
could
have to
lose
beat
three.
good teams.
I
If it's
think you
the
could
right
lose three.
three,
Yeah, if
yeah,
it's the right three.
probably.
If it's the
Um,
right three.
yeah, so teams are going to lose, and we're seeing less and less undefeated teams come through. Like that 2019 LSU, 2020 Bama. People say those are the two best teams of all time. Um, but I don't know how many more of those teams we're going to see. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but especially if Texas and Oklahoma come in, it's going to be really tough for one team to get away completely
Well,
unscathed.
Alabama would have,
They would be the team. Um,
beaten both of those teams this past year, and LSU did beat Oklahoma last year, and Alabama and Clemson and Georgia. I mean, they beat a lot of teams last year that were name brand. That 19 LSU team is I mean, maybe the best in history. I
as
mean, it's
that's probably the
close.
best team I've seen with my
Yeah,
two eyes.
they were really good, man. I mean, that Florida 8 team was really good, and the Miami team of '01 was really good, but those teams didn't, and then some of the Nebraska teams in the '90s, but those teams didn't have the week by week run of what you would have to deal with. I mean, like, listen, make no mistake about it, Matt. No matter what, there was some discussion with me the other day on Wednesday night about how would you do the scheduling? I mean, would you take, if you went to divisions, this 9 game thing, I don't know, but if you went to divisions and you had 8 in both sides, that would give you 7 plus a crossover. But in that scenario, man, Georgia would already have Auburn. They would lose a crossover. Tennessee would already have Tennessee. They would not. I said Auburn. I mean Alabama would not have a crossover anymore. One person said that they may not do it that way. You could have divisions, but you're not playing everyone in your division. You could,
That seems odd,
it does seem odd, but I think that's been kicked around. This person would know.
right?
It didn't happen, but um, and and some people also said, hey, the athletic directors don't know, and
I
point out.
mean, would they still play Georgia Tech every year? That's in the
I did
legislation.
ask that question, and the answer was yes. but one thing that one person at Georgia has always warned me of is don't think that that game will always be at the end of the season. It could be a beginning game of the season, and that's something that could happen.
I've got one more question for you, but every year we see Georgia, Clemson, Alabama. These teams have two kind of tune-up games: a Charleston Southern, a UAB. Is that stuff going to completely go away, you think, or are there still going to be an Arkansas State and whoever thrown in there at least 2 times a year?
For now, I think that will stay.
Yeah.
I just don't know in the future. If all of the so-called Power Five schools, the Big 12, Big 10, SEC, Pac-12, and ACC, if they all leave, we could see that there would be no more of those types of games. No more games against Arkansas State or Georgia Southern. There also, Matt, is do you? There's a lot of discussion behind the scenes that the Big Ten's not going to wait around and they are going to go get somebody, and they would attack the ACC for sure. They may add Kansas, but that they would look at, Boston College, Syracuse,
Notre Dame.
I mean Notre Dame for sure, but Notre Dame's going to look like they're on an island here soon. Right now, the ACC with what they do with the ACC, that allows them to continue their identity. I mean, for Notre Dame, people down here don't understand it, but for Notre Dame, their independence is the same thing as Georgia having hedges around the field or wearing silver breeches. It's just what they
It's
are.
their thing.
Yeah. So they have got the best of both worlds right now at the ACC. And, that means the ACC has 15 teams, 14 total in football, and then Notre Dame and everything else. So I do wonder if this means that the Big Ten will try to just look around. Does Colorado make sense? Look around. Does Boston College or et cetera make sense? If I were a small private school not in the SEC, I would be a little bit jumpy right now. Miami, Boston College, places like that, Duke, although they're firmly in the ACC, nothing's going to happen to Miami, I don't think. But I do think those Northeastern schools, I think Pitt would be a natural fit in the Big Ten. And I know they don't want it, but West Virginia, its academic standards certainly are not what the Big Tens are. But that's going away. I mean, that's an old relic of the past. West Virginia makes a lot of sense in the Big Ten. Adding West Virginia and Pittsburgh would be a big thing. And then the ACC would have to figure out what it wants to do, if it can do anything. Do they then add UCF? I mean, I think UCF is does the ACC add UCF in Cincinnati? And then that's the question. You have all these ramifications, and then the Pac-12, does it look at what's left of the Big 12 and say, yeah, we'll take Kansas and Baylor, or we'll take Texas Christian and Baylor?
They have to rename the conference, I guess.
No, I don't think they'd have to. I mean, the
the
big.
Pacific.
Well, what about Missouri as Southeastern?
Well, I've still never.
Or Kentucky for that
not familiar
matter.
with that. Yeah.
I mean, Kentucky's certainly not Southeastern.
That's the outside of the Southeast, but I mean, Oklahoma and Texas aren't Southeast either. But I mean,
maybe in culture,
yeah.
but maybe in culture to some degree. But Texas has always been its own thing. We know that well from Dylan Weber. But when you look at the Power Five schools and what remains, when I was at Coker in the '90s, we would do this exercise all the time. It's just that we wound up with Clemson and Florida State in the SEC, and some sort of disaster in the Pac-12 with Texas and Oklahoma and those guys. I do think I would be concerned if I were Baylor, very specifically Texas Tech. No one's coming to save them. Where do they wind up? The truth is, man, this is a TV game. It's been a TV game for a long time, and if you are not those teams, you're in trouble. Could you ever?
Quick. Oh, I was gonna say, what happens to Oklahoma State?
I think they're the odd cowboy out.
Yeah, really tough spot for them.
Really tough spot for Iowa State. I mean, who's coming to save Iowa State? I will mention this. I don't think this will happen either, But there has always been a tug with Georgia Tech. I mean, Georgia Tech's only been a member of the ACC for about the last 35 years, something like that. I do think that the Big Ten would look at Georgia Tech and say
We'll take you.
they fit our brand. They are a high level research institution. They are not great at sports, but neither is Nebraska.
Right.
So, the Atlanta market, it would give the Big Ten a foothold there. Does the Big Ten come after Georgia Tech? Would they come after Vanderbilt? And what would that mean for those two institutions? Georgia Tech, if they got invited to the Big Ten, should immediately go to the Big Ten. Vanderbilt, I think it's a harder discussion for them because of the money and the revenue and the reality of them living, being in Tennessee. Anymore, Matt, Atlanta is as close to Columbus, Ohio as it is to Boston College. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that those are the sorts of things that people need to watch out for. But I totally, as it stands today, right now, I do think that Texas and Oklahoma will get in. I don't. We'll go to the SEC. I think that the non-denial from Oklahoma yesterday was one thing that an insider told me was very obvious to them, and that we're just going to see if Texas A&M can figure out how to derail this. It's going to be hard for them to.
Yeah. Things were looking up for the Aggies too for a while, and they're a program doing all the right things, slowly getting there. But
does this stop them? Does Texas not being in the league really stop A&M? See, I don't subscribe to that. I do think they're on a roll, like you've said, and
they are.
But I don't.
Again,
I don't
there's
know.
still a window for them, especially if this isn't happening for 3 or 4 years. But they have a lot going on for sure. They're building a whole new, brand new facility over there. The money pouring into that place is crazy, really. But they're a program on the rise. But I think their AD even said, like, we wanted to be the only team from Texas here, and kind of bad news for them. But it shouldn't stop them because they have the right staff. Those guys know what they're doing, and they're clicking as a program right now.
Well, this is business, and Georgia and Florida are in the same league and in the same business. Auburn and Alabama, State and Ole Miss, everybody, it's just what it is. And Texas A&M is not going to win that fight if it comes down to it. I actually don't think that they'll win the fight, period. And this is probably going to be very close to a 13-1 vote, if not 12-2, although I don't know who the second one would be. People have been making noise that Missouri would not want them. I don't think Missouri, I think Missouri would welcome Oklahoma and Texas into the league because it cuts down on travel for a lot of other stuff for them. And if it increases revenue.
Yeah. They should get half a vote anyway. They just got here.
Well, that's not how it works. But a new negotiation with Texas and Oklahoma seems to be looming. Make sure you go to Dog Post to listen to more and read more. This is an ever-changing story. Matt, thanks for joining me. We'll see everybody over on the website.